Hello and welcome to Sociology 101. This is actually Chapter 2. So I'm jumping ahead to causation and correlation. So I want to give us a little bit of a definition first. Correlation is the strength of a relationship between two variables. And so do they, what's the relationship between them? The relationship is between -1 and +1. So the closer it is to the ones, the stronger the relationship. The closer the correlation coefficient is to 0, the smaller the relationship. 0 actually means that it's purely random. There is no relationship between the two. Whether it's a positive or a negative relationship simply refers to the direction to the direction that things are going. So, for example, and it does not have anything to do with good or bad, right? And that's actually the reason I'm going into this right now. If you have a spot on your arm and you're concerned about it, and you go in for a biopsy, you want the doctor to come back and you want her to say, well, that's negative, right? Because negative is good in that particular example. So if we know that the more you study, the higher your grade, wow, surprising I would choose that as an example, right? So as our study goes up, our grade goes up. That's a positive relationship, right? I mean, so arrows are going in the same direction, up or down. So that's we would plot that on the positive side. An inverse or negative relationship, go back to second grade math. Remember this? Remember when you first started working with integers, a positive times a positive is a positive, a negative times a negative is actually a positive, and a positive times a negative is a negative, right? So we're doing the same thing here for the golf fans in the room. In golf, you want to have the lowest scores possible, right? So the more you practice golf, the lower your score. That's an inverse relationship because the more we practice, the lower our score, right? So again, positive and negative has nothing to do with good or bad. So correlation is the strength of a relationship between two variables. What we're very clear about is that we cannot infer causation from a correlation. Just because two variables are linked together doesn't mean that one caused the other one to happen. Oftentimes excuse me, we refer to that as spurious. So a spurious relationship means that it seems as if the independent variable is influencing the dependent variable, but it really isn't. There's something else going on. I'll give you a great example of that. This is the standard spurious example. Let's say that the Sears Tower, Willis Tower, or whatever it's going to be called in the future. Let's say that the Sears Tower is on fire. And one of the things that we know is the more fire trucks that go to put out a fire, typically the larger the fire, right? So, or the more damage is done. So one might say, well, geez, if sending more fire trucks causes more damage to happen, well, then let's only send one, right? Let's just, the Sears Tower's on fire. Let's just send one little fire truck and then there won't be that much damage. Of course, that isn't true, right? So just because there's a relationship between two variables does not mean one is causing the other one to happen. In this example, it's not the number of fire trucks, right? Because we have a time order problem. The fire started, hopefully, the fire started before you contacted the fire department. So, how long was it burning? What's burning? How easy is it to get to? Right? There's all kinds of things which influence the amount of damage and the size of the fire that oftentimes have nothing to do with how many fire trucks that you send. Okay, so I want you to get a sense of just because there's a relationship or a correlation does not mean that causation has happened. So on the exam, and you've had this before, I want you to refresh, is I'm going to ask you the difference between an independent variable and a dependent variable. And an independent variable, and by the way, some things are always independent variables. Your age, your political affiliation, how much income your family has, those often influence other variables. And so variables which influence other variables are called independent variables. Dependent variables are the ones that change as a result of the influence. So your thoughts on abortion, your thoughts on whether the government should provide free college education, oftentimes are influenced by independent variables. And so again, independent variables influence other variables, and dependent variables are the ones that are affected by, right? Control variables. In sociology, we don't do many experiments, if any, right? We do a lot of surveys, which is great. We get data from surveys because we attach numerical values in our coding to different responses. So, for example, Likert scaling or Likert scaling, contingent on what part of the country you're from, is a pretty standard thing that we do. And an example would be somebody makes a statement, all sociology students should receive A's this semester, right? And then the responses would be A, strongly agree, B, agree, C, disagree, and D, strongly disagree. Well, we can attach numerical values to each one of those responses. And by doing that, we can actually get data, right? So we can actually have data from that. That's a lot of what we do in sociology. What we don't do are experiments. In an experiment, you control the independent variable. Let me give you an example. When I was in second grade, our teacher gave each of us students 3 clear plastic trays with dirt and a seed in it. Did you all do the same thing? We put masking tape around each of the trays with our name on it. We were on a corner room, so on one wall in the windowsills, we each placed our little tray with dirt and a seed in it, and that's all we did. On the back wall, um, on the back wall, not only did we place it there, but we watered it each day. In the green metal filing cabinets, which we had in the room, which we kept closed, we also put a tray in there. That was the control variable. That was the control. And what I mean by that is we controlled the independent variables by not giving the independent variables, which were sun and water. I think you figured that out. But we chose not to give sun or water to those just to see would it still grow, right? And of course, the ones which grew were the ones in the back that received sun and water. So that's a pretty straightforward example that someone can do where we're controlling the independent variables. And so when we're controlling the independent variables, we're really talking about an experiment. And again, in sociology, we don't do many of those. Other things that we do is we use ethnography, right, where we study people, and how they're living, in their own environment. It can be participant observation, so that we can observe people. This is harder than it sounds like. First of all, uh, if you walk up to someone and you have a white lab coat on, and you have a little sheet of paper, and you say to them, "Hey, I'm going to be over here in the corner somewhere, just watching, act normal," right? No one, of course, is going to act normal in that particular situation. So this is where you can get great information from participant observation, but you also set yourself up for some potential ethical issues. Years ago, 2 budding sociologists in California, in LA actually, uh, wanted to do their master's thesis on gang activity. And so they chose a particular gang in LA and they joined, right? I mean, now look, they didn't say, "Hey, we're college kids, we're doing this because we're studying you." They lied, right? So they joined up, they pretended they wanted to be gang members. And the years going on and nothing's happening. No one's being robbed. Nothing's being stolen. And they started to fear for their grade. Just let that sink in for a second. So they started to think, hey, we need some things to happen. Otherwise, we're not going to get a good grade on our thesis. So they started throwing out ideas. Well, you know what it's like. You're hanging out with your friends. You have nothing better to do. You're bored, and one of your friends says, hey, and then fill in the blank with something really stupid. And you're like, yeah, I'm not doing anything anyway, right? So they robbed a place. They got caught. And when the police were arresting everyone, these two students whipped out their college IDs and said, "Hey, we're doing participant observation. We're students. Don't arrest us." I'm not a gang member, but I think you're not supposed to tell on the other gang members. But the other gang members realized right away that these two were making the whole thing up. And so they told the police, hey, it was their idea, right? So our two budding sociologists never finished their master's degree because they didn't finish their thesis, and they actually went to prison. So yeah, don't make that kind of a mistake. But when we're doing ethnography, again, you can get great insight. See, when we do surveys, there's no insight in a survey, you're just getting data. The reason people do things like participant observation and interview people is because you want insight. So, you're looking for, well, why did things turn out this way? So it's great for that. You just have to be really careful. Oh, we talked about surveys and sampling in the first chapter. You know what? Let's just leave it right there for this. So on the exam, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a paragraph. And from that paragraph, I want you to tell me what's the independent variable, what's the dependent variable. Um, is there a correlation here, right? Or is it a positive correlation, negative correlation, any correlation? Is it a spurious relationship? And by the way, none of these are trick questions, right? So this isn't going to be a difficult question. The reason I'm telling you is an awful lot of students don't study independent variable and dependent variable, and then they get stuck on this. So I want you to know I'm going to ask 3 or 4 questions on this. So make sure that you put a little extra time into studying independent variable and dependent variable. I hope you have a great day.